Hey y'all, and welcome to another 10-minute Texans talk. Let's talk about how the Texans are doing in free agency so far, and just really this offseason. A lot of discussion around how the Texans have done. Some people less than happy with what they've done with the offensive line. It's tough to grade them at this point because I think there's some context that's needed for the whole offseason. I think there will be some harsher grades on free agency if the Texans choose not to make another move in the offensive line department specifically. I would argue that the only two moves that they really should or need to make in some way, shape, or form is more of a starting level guard and then a swing tackle. But you could also address both of those in the draft. It's just a matter of if you think the Texans have someone who's capable of starting at right or left guard on the roster as it stands. What it could be is this. Now, I said it at the start of free agency. It's not a Texans free agency period without Nick handing out one-year deals to any and everyone that he can get his hands on. That's just how Nick Caserio functions. And so it could be that the Texans have so much faith in Cole Popovich and Nick Caley, O-line coach and OC coming in, and the fact that the coaching was what the problem was with the O-line, that they're willing to bet that if they bring in, Ed Ingram, second-round pick out of LSU, didn't quite work out in Minnesota, maybe he works out here. You bring in Laken Tomlinson, has started in the league, could have the potential to be a starter. You bring in guys to contend for the other job. You have Juice Scruggs on the roster if he doesn't win the center job, which, I personally am of the position that Jarrett Patterson is the center until proven otherwise. I do imagine, based off of D'Amico's love for competition at any spot that he can get it, that's also what's driving a lot of. They brought in a few offensive linemen. They just haven't brought in any that are viewed as like, oh, they signed that guy to start at insert position here. Like, as far as we know, there is no official starter at right or left guard as it stands. And we know the Texans' intentions at tackle, but the importance of a swing tackle over the past two seasons, with Blake Fisher getting significant time last season, with George Fant, who is a free agent right now, getting significant play the year before, and holding up really well. The importance of the swing tackle position cannot be understated. But the question a lot of people will ask is why did we ship off Kenyon Green in order to bring in Ed Ingram? It feels like trading, cheese for cheese. I don't know. It's just, the same thing. Both have not had the best of performances. Someone pointed out the Texans got rid of Kenyon Green, who is the fifth worst pass blocking guard by some metric. I can't remember what it was. And then added two of the four worst guards in that metric in Laken Tomlinson and Ed Ingram. And to that I'll say, I think that with Kenyon Green, you're like, James, you just said that Ed Ingram could stand to benefit from being in Houston. Why didn't they just try and reclaim Kenyon Green? There's a point where it's a change of scenery is needed. Like, that's part of why Ed Ingram could improve in Houston. It's part of why, with the O-line coach that the Eagles have, there's a belief that Kenyon Green could be, salvaged in Philadelphia. Is it guaranteed? No. And I think it's a high-risk move to assume the Texans are just going to grab it, if they do grab one starting level guard. You have to assume that's what they're looking to do in this draft, right? But there is the possibility that they're just trying to bring in as much competition as possible and spend the premium picks elsewhere. Is that likely, in my opinion? But I'm getting a little off the plot. The Texans do need to bring in someone to help, and a lot of the guys they brought in are in that category of like, has had a chance elsewhere, had high expectations coming into the league, and didn't quite meet those. And so the change of scenery part is an important part. Also, the fact that all of these are low-risk signings, the only risk you really take is either A, the guy sucks and doesn't earn the job, or you have to start someone who's less than, which is not ideal given that we want CJ to succeed, and the O-line play has been pretty direct contributor to the lack thereof this past season. But the other possibility is that the player is so good. It's similar to the offensive coordinator conundrum the Texans will find themselves in as it goes forward, which is that if Nick Caley's good, he'll get a head coaching job. If he's not good, you just have to find another guy until you get your guy. So with that, those guards that they brought on are guys that, they could show out. They could have an excellent go of it, and it'll become, oh wow, the Texans now might have to, they could have paid more prior, but there was a risk that the guy wouldn't pan out. Now there's the risk that another team is going to be more willing to meet that price tag. We've seen the guard market this season be just absolutely astronomically higher than what was projected by some people. Guys signing $3 and $4, even $5 million more per year on their contracts than was initially thought. So it almost isn't surprising the Texans aren't grabbing a starting level guard in free agency. And that's what leads me to believe that in the draft, there's a lot that will lead you to believe in the draft the Texans should go, high on a guard, whether it's Booker, Ratledge, Donovan Jackson. There's a few names, Zabel, that could be there at 25. If they trade back, they could be looking for a guy, in the early second. But there is a lot of reason to believe that is where they will go after a guard. Now, the reason I'm not I wouldn't be frustrated if they didn't, as long as they grab a guy and by the third, I think, is that, Jarrett Patterson has played really well, was a 6th round pick. Juice Scruggs has struggled and was a 2nd round pick. Now, you may not remember, but I remember a time when the Texans, we were really invested in trying to find a center in that draft. So it was an foregone conclusion the Texans were going to do it. But then Juice Scruggs kind of came out of left field. In hindsight, there was some people that were really high on him, and he might have gone there or maybe shortly thereafter in the 3rd. But most analysts and draft guys were tracking other center options, some of which were still on the board when the Texans drafted Scruggs. But the Texans really like Scruggs, and it continues a trend of the, and I don't want to call it right now. I don't want to say right now Juice Scruggs is a bust, because there's still time, but it kind of continues the trend of Nick Caserio and his inability. I don't want to go too hard on it, but I mean, realistically, most of the interior O-line he's drafted early in the draft has not done well for the team. So with Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs being the examples in that field, whereas the later picks have kind of done a little better. So do with that information what you will. But the simple fact is that I don't think you need to give the Texans a low free agency grade just because they didn't address these issues that are clearly very pressing in free agency. That was one of the options they had. And like I said, there will be people that will be there's already been people that are F. The Texans get an F because they got rid of their best offensive lineman and did not replace him immediately in free agency. And they won't look at the fact that the Texans got a good return on an aging offensive lineman who is really good in pass pro and leaves, is serviceable as a run blocker. And could have had other things contributing. There's been reports, and I agree with Garrett Houston Texans kind of spoke on this. One of the reports on the rumored toxicity of the offensive line room in Houston from Albert Breer and Laramie Tunsil's contribution to that is not really backed by any sort of sourcing outside of someone may have told him and he may need to protect that source, but it's not typical stuff where he said I heard from a player in the locker room. It felt the way it read was a statement that was kind of disingenuous without the backing that was needed to make it more legit. But that being said, there are a lot of people that would agree that Laramie Tunsil is a really skilled offensive lineman who was commanded into leadership due to his skill, but was not necessarily a great leader in a lot of ways in terms of setting the example for the younger guys, setting the culture. And that's just a fact of life. When you're good at something, I've said that before. I said that in the last 10-minute Texans talk, that when you're good at something, people will look to you as a leader, but not everyone who's good at something is meant to be a leader. So all that to say, I think free agency has gone pretty well. If this is what it is, it's not an A, it's not a flawless free agency, but especially since most of the most significant signing the Texans made was Sheldon Rankins, which is basically a re-signing if you think about it. But I mean, they shored up the interior defensive line, they added depth in the wide receiver room, to set up for what I assume to be a higher move in the draft for a wide receiver. At least that's what I'm seeing based off of the guys they've signed for wide receiver. I didn't see any names outside of Christian Kirk, who they traded for, that were like expected to be significant contributors in this wide receiver. And I could be wrong. I mean, maybe they have big plans for Justin Watson, in this wide receiver room, but I don't know if I necessarily would say that's a lock to happen. It's just, once again, competition and the like or whatever. So the Texans did have a good free agency. They met a lot of their needs. I'd say what made free agency really good for them was the trades they made, which is why I think if you're looking at free agency as just signings and re-signings and all that, yeah, the Texans, maybe rank a little lower, but I wouldn't put them below like a B-. I think C is like the lowest I would put the Texans if we're just basing it on that. But when you include the context of the trades, it's hard to be low on the Texans in the totality of what they've done since free agency has started. So far in this little checkup we're doing with free agency, I don't think there's any reason to panic. There are the people that will, light the beacon and sound the call and let you know that the Texans are in trouble because of where they're at now. This is not the roster that's going to take the field. There's still a draft. Hit me up after the draft. If the Texans have not adequately addressed the offensive line after the draft, maybe start kind of getting a little worried, but there is still the possibility of trades or signings that can move the roster between even the draft and at the start of the season. So it's early, and I will implore you guys to not panic. All right, and that's about it. That's about all I got to say. So thanks for listening to this 10-minute Texans talk. I think it was 10 minutes. Yeah, it looks like it was about 10 minutes. As always, you can find me at James Roy NFL wherever you find your social media. Tom and I go live every Monday, at least that we can. I don't know, last Monday we didn't, but for the bullpen, so make sure you're tuned into that. It's more interactive. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans.